Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us for today's special U.S. Department of Health and Human Services panel discussion on navigating federal employment as a military spouse, in honor of celebrating Military Spouse Appreciation Day that happened this past Friday, May 10th, 2024. Today's panel event will feature the inspiring stories of three current HHS employees, all of whom are military spouses, and highlighting their pathways into federal employment and key milestones in their careers within HHS. So before we begin, there are a few rules of engagement. The event is being recorded, and a PDF copy of the slides will be sent out to all the event attendees. We request that if you do need closed captioning, you can manually turn on this feature using the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will be an opportunity to submit questions to the panelists at a disclosed time later in the presentation, but please remember to stay on topic. Any questions regarding HR matters or job application statuses or inquiries can be answered by the contact information listed at the bottom of the job vacancy that you've already applied for. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our distinguished HHS colleagues. I'm joined today by a wonderful group of individuals who, without their support, today's event would not have been possible. Paris Benora serves as HHS's Veterans Employment Program Officer. Drew Sullivan is a public affairs specialist on our team who's handled all the marketing, social media graphics, and event promotion for today's event. And my name is Matthew Merritt, and I serve as a recruitment program specialist for HHS, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. For today's agenda, I'll highlight the HHS mission statement and our organizational chart. And then we'll hear a keynote speech from Office of Personnel Management's Adrian Williams. Our Veterans Employment Program Officer, Paris Benora, will touch on hiring authorities for military spouses to help you navigate the federal application process. Next, I'll introduce the panelists for today, followed by a Q&A session. And then following the Q&A, I'll provide additional resources for military spouses and show each of you how to connect with our team for further information and engagement. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services mission statement is to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans by providing for effective health and human services and by fostering sound, sustained advances in the sciences underlying medicine, public health, and social services. The department has 12 operating divisions or agencies that include the following: Administration for Children and Families, Administration for Community Living, Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the Health Resources Service Administration, the Indian Health Service, the National Institutes of Health, and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. HHS also has 16 staff divisions, including one uniform service, that include the following: the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Administration, the Office of Secretary for Financial Resources, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Legislation, the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, the Departmental Appeals Board, HHS's Chief Information Officer, the Office of Intergovernmental External Affairs, the immediate Office of the Secretary, Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, Office of the Civil Rights, Office of Global Affairs, Office of General Counsel, Office of the Inspector General, Office of Medicare Hearing and Appeals, Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, and the U.S. Public Health Service Commission Corps. Our keynote speaker for today is Mr. Adrian Williams from the Office of Personnel Management. Mr. Williams started working in the federal service in 2015 and has over 28 years of experience in military and federal recruitment and staffing, human resource management, and organizational and strategic management. Mr. Williams is currently a senior human resource specialist and government-wide military spouses program manager at the U.S. Office of Personnel Management's Talent Acquisition, Classification, and Veterans Programs. Mr. Williams completed his bachelor's degree in informational systems and attained a master's degree in business administration from the University of Phoenix. I'll now hand it over to Mr. Williams.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and most importantly, our honored military spouses. I want to thank you for letting me have this opportunity to come out and celebrate you, the military spouse during this HHS event, navigating federal employment as a military spouse. And I understand this day is dedicated to recognizing you and the resiliency, the strength and dedication that you provide every single day to both the nation and your family. It is truly my honor to be here today and pay tribute to the incredible men, women, and men who support our service members and contribute so significantly to our nation. Me myself, I'm a veteran, and I understand where you are, what you have to go through, because as a veteran with over 26 plus years on active duty, I had to move. I had to go from point A, point B, and at the time I was married, and I understand what my spouse would have to go through, especially if she was enjoying a job in one place and had to go somewhere else. And every day as military spouses, I know you have to continually manage your households, raise your children, and often juggle careers while supporting your spouses through their deployments, relocations, and the unique, and I truly mean unique, challenges of military life. You face numerous employment challenges also, whether your spouse is on active duty, reserve, or National Guard. Each one of these careers provide an unpredictable nature for that service member, and you still support their schedules, their activations, deployments, and relocations. And I know these challenges can continue to affect your employability and career accession, even after that service member retires or leaves the military in some way, shape, or form. And I've been moved by the stories, and I do mean moved because I get to listen and hear about military spouses. And I understand amidst all these challenges, you continue to nurture your careers, raise your families, and contribute significantly to your communities. And they are powerful stories and a reminder, and I'm here as a reminder of how you deserve our support. And as a military spouse program manager, and in recognition of your sacrifices, I wanted to come here today and provide you some of the federal initiatives that have been issued to empower you, the military spouse, in the community that you are within. These initiatives were designed to create the opportunities and provide the resources that can ensure you can continue to thrive in your careers despite the challenges that you may face. The two most significant developments that I'll talk about here real quickly are Executive Order 14100 and Executive Order 13832. The most recent EO, Executive Order 14100, which was signed just last year on June 9, 2023 by President Biden, the Advancing Economic Security for Military and Veteran Spouses, Caregivers, and Survivors, was one of the most comprehensive executive actions to increase the economic security of the military-connected community. It truly underscores the federal government's commitment to improving the recruitment, development, and retention strategies and become an employer choice for the military-connected families. And these initiatives set truly a true way, a course, providing guidance to remind agencies of the existing flexibilities available to retain that military spouse community. Key initiatives within that are ensuring all job opportunity announcements outside the agency's internal workforce are listed on USA.gov and open to the military spouse through the military spouse non-competitive appointing authority. There's also reinforcing existing alternative workplace arrangements such as telework and remote work flexibility options, and encouraging agencies to establish policies that can provide up to 5 days of administrative leave for military spouses undergoing a geographic relocation due to a service member's orders. Also, agencies are encouraged to collaborate to assist military spouses in finding new positions when they cannot retain their current jobs due to a PCS relocation. These are a key initiative that are put in place just last year. The second initiative, which was enacted in 2018, was Executive Order 13832, enhancing non-competitive civil service of certain military spouses. What this executive order do is it exhorted agencies to provide greater opportunities for military spouses to be considered for federal jobs in the competitive service using the government-wide non-competitive hiring authority. And this was a key component back in 2018, because what it did, that executive order, it eliminated the criteria that has long hampered military spouses. Because what it did is it eliminated the criteria that that the spouse and the service member had to be in the same geographic area or at the same duty station. This allowed agency to apply an ability to appoint military spouses that weren't in the same geographic location as their service member. The CEO also directed agencies to actively advertise and promote military spouse hiring authority and solicit application from those military spouses for positions advertised on USA.gov or any other means the agency wanted to utilize. Again, these were key initiatives under those executive orders, and they support the military spouse community. I'd also like to introduce a couple of other elements that should be understood and implemented as you continue to navigate the federal government. One of the key elements that I really hope that you start to utilize is leverage. As military spouses, you have to leverage the resources and opportunities available to you. You have to advocate and articulate your ask. And by taking advantage of Executive Order 14100 and Executive Order 13882, these are key elements that you have to educate yourself on and understand. Because within those executive orders, there's also other provisions for those who may have a professional license that allows the smooth transition from one state to another. Also, understanding the expanding work-life flexibility, because you are and live in a very mobile lifestyle. If you understand and continue to educate and advocate for yourself within these, you will provide greater opportunities and help continue to build upon your federal career. Attitude. A positive attitude, it truly is going to make a world of difference in your career. You have to embrace these challenges, opportunities as they come to you, and do it with optimism and determination. Your attitude will continue to influence your own success, but also inspire others around you. Having the right mindset is so crucial. A growth mindset truly encourages continuous learning and development. It allows you to see the setbacks as opportunities for growth and to persist in the face of adversities. Adopting a growth mindset will enable you to adapt to the new situations and seize the opportunities that come your way. Skill set is just another vital component of your success. Being in the federal government, we are committed to providing the training and development opportunities to help you enhance your skills and stay competitive in the job market and stay competitive in the occupation that you have currently. But the one thing you have to do, you have to advocate and take advantage of these resources. You may have to go out and reach out and find those opportunities, whether it be in HHS or any other agency. They're there, but it's up to you to actually go and acquire and ask, where can you go get them? Toolkits. Again, these are other resources such as career counseling, resume writing workshops, and networking opportunities among the ERGs or other organizations within your agency. The federal government offers a variety of tools to help you succeed, but you also have to look for those opportunities outside the federal government that are going to continue to help you succeed. And utilize these tools. Please utilize these tools to build a robust support network that is going to help you navigate your career journeys and complexities. Finally, assets, your skills, your experiences, and your personal qualities. These are the true reflection of you. Your unique background as a military spouse equips you with resilience, adaptability, and a strong work ethic, making you invaluable to both your team that you currently work with and your agency overall. Embrace your identity and let it shine through in your professional endeavors. And as I close here today, I want to reaffirm that we are committed to supporting you, the military spouse. We recognize your sacrifices and that you make in the invaluable contributions you bring to our nation. And together, I know we will work towards creating a more supportive and inclusive environment where you can both thrive and achieve in your career aspirations. So again, I just want to say thank you for your dedication, resilience, and unwavering support for our service members. And I want to again, because I wasn't here on last Friday, happy Military Spouse Day. And I salute each and every one of you and say thank you for giving me this time.
All right, thank you, Adrian, for those wonderful, insightful words to help better equip our military spouse applicants with specific tools and knowledge of programs designed to assist them. So now it's time to briefly introduce our wonderful panelists. Traci McCombs, Teresa Bassma, and Dr. Precious Goodson. Please state your name, pronouns, current position, and agency, starting with Traci.
Hi, everyone. My name is Traci McCombs. She, her, and hers are my pronouns. I'm a talent management specialist at the Department of Health and Human Services, specifically the staff division of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health.
All right. I'm Teresa Bassma. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a health education specialist at the CDC in the Division of Global Migration Health.
And hello, my name is Precious Goodson. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a health education specialist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
All right, fantastic. And we'll have more time to learn about each of our panelists following brief information from our Veterans Employment Program Officer, Paris Benora. Paris will go over a few hiring authorities for military spouses to further help assist and expedite your application when applying. Everyone, please welcome Paris Benora.
Thank you, Matt. Good afternoon, everyone. As Matt mentioned, I am the VPO for HHS, and today I would like to talk to you about the non-competitive hiring authority of certain military spouses so you can understand how the authority works and who it applies to. If you are a military spouse, you may be eligible to apply to federal jobs using non-competitive hiring authority, so let's get into it. As highlighted earlier in today's keynote, President Biden issued an additional executive order in June of 2023 that provides non-competitive civil service appointments for military spouses. This hiring authority will be available through 2028. It allows agencies to appoint certain military spouses without using traditional competitive examining and remove the requirements of permanent change of station or a geographic area of permanent duty station. Now let's dive into the details of the hiring authority provided by Executive Order 1382. This authority enables agencies at their discretion to hire military spouse applicants to any position in the competitive service for which they are qualified. Military spouses must apply to a vacancy on USA Jobs and meet certain criteria to be eligible. One key aspect is that there's no grade level limitation, meaning eligible spouses can apply for permanent, temporary, or term positions at any grade level. It's important to note that while agencies are encouraged to use this hiring authority, they're not required to do so. It does not take precedence over the use of other appointment mechanisms. This means that agencies have a flexibility in their hiring process while still having the option to utilize this valuable resource and support military spouses. Let's talk about eligibility for the military spouse hiring authority. To qualify for a civil service position under this authority, you must fall into one of the following categories. First, you must be a spouse of an active duty U.S. Armed Forces, of the U.S. Armed Forces. Second, you must be a spouse of a service member who's 100% disabled due to a service-connected injury at the time of separation from military service. Third, you must be a spouse of a deceased service member killed while on active duty. If you meet any of these criteria, you may be eligible to apply for federal jobs through this authority. For more information, you can visit the Military Spouse Non-Competitive Appointing Authority section of the OPM website. Continuing on, it's important to note that eligibility under this authority does not guarantee you a job within the U.S. federal government. To be considered for a position, including under this authority, you must apply to OPM's USA Jobs website and meet qualification standards and additional requirements such as a background investigation. It's important to keep in mind that if you remarry, you may no longer be eligible for this authority. Documentation will be required to prove your eligibility, and you can refer to the screenshot on this slide for examples of the types of documentation that may be needed. Let's make sure we're clear on eligibility requirements so you can take full advantage of this authority. Let's discuss spousal eligibility based on active duty military status of your spouse. If you are currently married to an active duty military member, you may receive unlimited, permanent, temporary, or term appointments with no geographic restrictions for eligible spouses. This provides you with flexibility and seeking federal employment opportunities regardless of your location. Now, let's talk about spousal eligibility based on disability of a service member. If you are a spouse of a service member who is 100% disabled due to service-connected injury at the time of separation from military service, you're eligible for certain appointments. Similar to active duty military status, there's no geographic restrictions for eligible spouses. However, you are limited to one permanent appointment, but there's no limitation on temporary or term appointments. Moving on, let's discuss spousal eligibility based on the death of a service member. If the spouse of a service member was killed on active duty, you're eligible for certain appointments. Similar to the previous categories, there's no geographic restriction for eligible spouses. However, if you remarry, you're no longer eligible. You are limited to one permanent appointment, but there's no limitation on temporary or term appointments. Now that we've covered eligibility, let's talk about which jobs are open to military spouses. When viewing a job announcement on USA Jobs, look for the Open To section. If a job is open to military spouses, you'll see a green icon with overlapping white circles. You may also see other hiring paths listed, including those open to federal employees and the public. You can apply to positions that match your eligibility as a military spouse. Next, let's explore how to filter positions on USA Job to find positions open to military spouses. On USA Jobs main search page, you can search filters on the right-hand side to narrow your job search and choose military spouse filter, and your results will display all the jobs open to military spouses. This makes it easier to find relevant job opportunities. In order to apply to federal jobs, you must familiarize yourself with USA Jobs. The entire federal application process leading up to a potential interview occurs in USA Jobs. So remember to include your military spouse documents, tailor your resume to each position, and don't delay in applying. If you have questions, utilize the point of contact listed in the announcement. Best of luck in your job search, and now I'll hand it back to Matt so you can hear from our panelists.
All right. Thank you, Paris, for that insightful information for resources for military spouses and how to expedite their application process, as well as find additional resources that are posted on USA Jobs. So now let's get back to our wonderful panelists, starting with Traci McCombs.
All right, thank you, Matt. So as I said earlier, I work for the Department of Health and Human Services. I'll just briefly go over my history and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you guys might have further down the presentation. I've been a military spouse for 14 years. My husband has been active duty for 20. I've followed him around the world. We've been in North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Germany. You name it, I've probably been there. I've led a number of FRG and SFRGs. For those of you that have been in a while, they've renamed the Soldier and Family Readiness Group. Currently, my husband is the commander of 214 CAV, and I help support the SFRG with that. I've received different awards throughout the years that I'm very proud of, because I do think volunteer service is so very important, not only just to support your local community, but it's also great information that you can add to your resume as relevant work experience. I started my federal career about 13 years ago. I started at the National Institutes of Health. I started out as a GS7 coming in through the Pathways program. I was a human resources specialist. I knew nothing about the federal government. To be honest, I didn't even know what the NIH stood for, but I did know a friend who understood the hiring mechanisms, and I leaned on her heavily. So my advice is just try to understand military spouse hiring authorities, try to understand, your best way to get your foot in the door, no matter the grade, no matter the series. I think the most important part is just trying to get into the federal government, and we can talk more about that later. After being at the NIH, I worked my way over to being a management analyst. I worked on special projects for the human resources director for a time and truly enjoyed that. And the last few years, I have been at OASH, building a corporate recruitment function within our program, our staff division. I got a bachelor's in art history. I went back to get a master's in business administration because there are not a lot of careers that utilize a bachelor's in art history, unless you want to be a curator at a museum. I'm not sure what else you can do with that. And then I also recently got my Lean Six Sigma Green Belt certification. Happy to dive into any more of those topics more as we move forward, but I want to give time to the other panelists as well to share a little bit more about themselves and their experience. So I'm going to hand it over to Teresa.
All right. Yeah, my name is Teresa Bassma, and I've been a military spouse for 7 years, and my husband's been active duty for 12. We spent a majority of our time actually in Colorado Springs, 5 years there, where I worked at the local health department, and then loved that job, but had gotten orders to Georgia. So I was looking up like how to get into the CDC because they were headquartered in Georgia, applied and got in October 2022. And then just 5 months later, in March 2023, we got orders again for Tampa, Florida. And so we had to move very quickly after being in Georgia for a short time. And I luckily was able to ask for the support of my supervisors to go remote outside of the Atlanta area, and they made it happen for me. And it even predated Executive Order 14100 that Mr. Williams talked about. So I was really lucky to be able to be living in Tampa now. And then I also, just about my education, have a master's of education and health behavior and health education. So being a health education specialist, I'm right in my career field, which I acknowledge is something that's very rare for military spouses. And I'll hand it over to our next panelist.
Thank you, Teresa. Hi, my name is Precious Goodson, and I am a military caregiver and a veteran spouse to my husband, who served in the Army as a combat medic until he was medically retired. After he returned wounded from Afghanistan, I left everything I knew at the time, including my career, to care for him. I needed flexibility and something that worked with my schedule and my new caregiving demands. So I returned to school with the GI Bill to pursue a doctorate specializing in e-learning and instructional design. While attending the online school full-time, I also continued to coordinate my husband's care while continuing to advocate for his benefits and his care. Shortly into my doctoral program, I was selected to serve as a fellow with the Elizabeth Dole Foundation to raise awareness of others who care for wounded, ill, and injured service members and veterans. and also started a blog to share resources that help me and my husband to navigate this new everyday life as a wounded warrior couple. I eventually completed my doctorate, and I chose to study the population of military caregivers. So I designed a study built from the seminal RAND study that was commissioned by the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, and that analyzed the military caregiver population. I explored and I evaluated the need for an e-learning platform for caregivers. So in 2019, after completing my dissertation, I worked as an adjunct professor. I served on a dissertation committee at an online school. And I also disseminated my findings from my dissertation and presented at conferences and wrote articles. And in 2021, I wrote articles from the findings of my dissertation. And in 2021, I was fortunate to start here at the CDC as an ORISE fellow. I served with the Workforce Development Branch of the Division of Laboratory Services to provide education and e-learning to laboratory professionals. And after 2 years of working as an ORISE fellow, a position opened in our branch, and I applied for it. And I was hired as a federal employee within the Office of Laboratory Science and Safety's Workforce Development Branch. And so I serve as a health education specialist, renewing continuing education credits and providing training and education to support laboratory professionals.
All right, well, thanks everyone for those inspiring introductions from our panelists. Now we're going to ask the panel a few prepared questions, as well as open up the floor to the audience and a few to answer a few of your submitted questions via the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. And remember to please keep in mind that due to time, we won't be able to answer everyone's questions, but please be patient as we answer your appropriate questions. All right, so for today's questions that we've already prepared, we'll start with Traci and then Teresa and then Precious. So our first question for the panelists is, how did each of you navigate your own federal application process?
Thank you, Matt. Kind of like I touched on a little bit in my introduction, I did not know anything about the federal government when I decided to apply. So I leaned heavily on a few friends that did understand the process to review my resume and help me understand how important a resume is, and that, you know, when you go to apply on USA Jobs, you could click and answer one question incorrectly and it could automatically disqualify you from even reaching, you know, the hiring manager. Again, I had no awareness of any of these things. So the way I navigated my federal application process was actually I was networking. I had a lot of friends that knew that I wanted to get into the world of HR, and that I did not have any HR experience when I started. So I leaned on people who understood kind of how to get your foot in the door with the federal government. I think the first thing you need to know when you apply to a federal job is, what are you eligible for and what are you qualified for? Because those are two separate things. Eligibility and qualifications are different. So know, you know, if you're a current student or you've graduated within a specific amount of time, you are eligible to apply through pathways or recent graduate announcements, as well as knowing your military spouse preference, because it does vary based on your current situation. I think that is the first step. Know what you're eligible for, and then you can worry about what you're qualified for. As far as the application process, don't be afraid to apply to a GS5, GS7, GS9 position, because when you really think about it, it's a long-term investment, not only in like a salary that you're receiving, but your TSP, your retirement, all these other things that come into being a federal employee. So view it as kind of a stepping stone to get to where you want to go. And I'll pass it over to Teresa.
Sure. Okay. Like I also mentioned in my introduction, I applied in conjunction with a move to Georgia, and I applied using the Military Spouse Hiring Authority, which allowed me to compete with other eligible applicants like federal employees, veterans, people with disabilities, that group of people. And I hate to say it was kind of easy because it worked out. But I also used resources in my installation. We call it Army Community Services, but there's different words or different names for every branch, but they'll help you with your resume and even help you tailor it. And so I had used that already for my resume and was using that to apply to positions located in Atlanta. All right, Precious.
Okay, well, and I experienced something pretty similar to what Tracy was talking about earlier. When my husband first returned from Afghanistan, and I didn't know anything about applying for the federal government. I had heard that there were some things in place for military families that would help the process or make it easier when it comes to being employed with the federal government. But I didn't really know what that was. But fast forward, after my doctorate, I was, trying again after becoming an ORISE fellow. And so I reached out to, when a position opened up in my branch, I reached out to HR for help translating the USA job posts that were requirements, that also gave the requirements for the documentation to make sure that I understood the documentation that was required for me to be eligible to apply for the announcement. So what I did, and what I would even say, is just to leverage the support available from HR. Call the number on the announcement. That's what I did. I called the number on the announcement that's at the bottom of the job posting, and I asked questions to ensure that my file was complete, to ensure that I had the right information and documentation in place so that I would be considered eligible for the position, and would be able to move forward in the job hiring process. So I think that it's really important to be knowledgeable about how to apply for the position by reviewing again the job announcement, noting all of the requirements for the position, and having what's necessary in place so that you're able to be eligible as a military spouse or a veteran spouse to secure a position. That's what I did to secure the position that I currently hold.
All right, those are wonderful answers. And as we can see, there isn't one direct linear path, and some are easier than others. So it's just important that you understand all of the resources, all of the hiring authorities, all of the additional links provided by OPM, HHS, in order for you to put your best foot forward when submitting an application, and being patient throughout the process as well. So a few of y'all already mentioned a few tips that you have, but what additional, specific tips regarding highlighting experience on resume, networking opportunities, what additional tips or resources for military spouses do you have for the individuals, attending today's session that are currently navigating federal employment for themselves? And we'll start with Teresa, and then Precious, and then Tracy.
Yeah, I would say to start with your installation and the employment readiness program, because there's, in addition to the resource help that or resume help that I mentioned. They also do classes about all the different hiring authorities. So kind of how Paris went over, but in a whole hour. And they're all dedicated to finding employment for military spouses and active duty service members who are separating from the military and other veterans. And so that's a great resource that we can take advantage of. And they know all of the latest things about federal resume writing. So you don't have to hire somebody. This is free, something free provided on each installation. And then I would say if you're not attached to an installation, if you have some sort, like if you're married to a recruiter or something, I would just get in touch with any installation. I'm sure they would still help you virtually. So that would be my biggest tip, is to use your resources on your base or wherever you're stationed.
I have several tips. First of all, I would say that it is definitely to someone's advantage who falls in the status of being a veteran caregiver of a veteran spouse of someone who is a service member, 100% disabled and service connected, or a military spouse, or a Gold Star spouse, to look on USA Jobs for those positions that they would be eligible for, that you would be eligible for. Because applying for those would put you in a smaller pool of candidates. So instead of just being limited to only applying to positions that are open to the entire public that are announced on USA Jobs, you can apply to internal announcements with, that are open for military spouses. And that's advantageous. And also I would also recommend to attend webinars like these that offer tips, and keep those tips in a file to pull back up and refer to the links and resources that are shared, and get familiar with how to use USA Jobs. It's a big portal, and it like Paris mentioned at the top of the call, it from everything concerning being hired for a position with the federal government is all, embodied within that USA Jobs. So it's important to know how to navigate it. And so my final tip would be to get a mentor, because navigating the federal process can be very overwhelming, and it's important to have help. I sought help. I sought mentorship of the federal hiring process on multiple occasions, and it's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay to get more than one perspective about your federal employment portfolio.
Thank you, Precious. And I'm seeing a lot of really great questions come in. Alexandria, Sarah, Lindsay, Catherine, Tammy, Jacqueline. I've read y'all's questions, and they're very good questions. And it seems like there's two buckets right now. There's a bucket of people trying to get into the federal government, and then there's a bucket of people who are already in the federal government trying to retain or advance. And so I'll start with the navigating the federal employment for those who are not employed by the federal government. To be fully transparent, there are some agencies that are very remote friendly, and then there's some that aren't. And there's no way to really know that when you're navigating USA Jobs, right? So you don't want to be wasting your time applying for something where, if you did PCS, there's a slim chance to no chance of you being able to retain your position. And I don't have a really good answer to that question, except, when you do apply to these jobs, you will likely see trends of which agencies have remote positions and which ones don't, or which departments within certain agencies have remote positions and which ones don't. Because certain job series do require in-person things due to the role and responsibility of the job, but then there's other jobs within the federal government that can be remote. Navigating that's very hard, and I don't have a perfect answer to that question, but I would say just kind of keep your eyes open and be honest about you're moving or you're PCSing, because I think the most important thing you can have is a trust and a great relationship with your direct supervisor, which is what has helped me so much in my own personal career, is having a very good relationship with my direct reports, which has helped me on numerous occasions during PCS moves, OCONUS moves, all of those things we have to do. I also think for those who are currently employed in the federal government and they're either PCSing or you're trying to get a promotion, those types of things, it can be really challenging right now because we have this return to the physical workplace initiative, which is kind of counterintuitive to hiring military spouses. It's kind of like oil and water, to be honest, because we all know very few military spouses stay at one location for an extended period of time. So how can you, keep your job when you move? How can you, get promoted if you're a remote employee? Again, those are really difficult questions to answer, and I think those are all on a case-by-case basis. But navigating your own employment, first and foremost, I would say have that really honest, transparent conversation with your direct reports on what your career goals are. Make sure you're always looking at your PMAP and you're constantly documenting all the amazing things that you're accomplishing, and really have serious conversations about your performance plans and like what you would like to achieve in the future, or what you could do as a remote employee if given the chance to take your job with you with the next PCS move. And I say giving them as much time as possible, like heads up about it, I think increases your chances of being retained as well. I did an OCONUS move to Germany right before COVID, and I let my direct supervisor know I think 8 to 10 months in advance of that move. I just gave her a heads up that that was coming, that I had no idea what paperwork needed to be submitted, and like wanted to make sure I had full 100% support of my leadership before we dove into that with the HR, or all of the things that go into working from overseas. So that's my advice. I know that I wish I could give, better answers to that question. But what has worked well for me is just having a very, very good relationship with my direct reports. And I'll hand it back over to Matt.
Yeah, those are phenomenal answers. Being resourceful and using resources that are already available at your installation, that are all over the country. Making sure that you understand the process and you're being very creative and exhaustive in using the resources, finding a mentor, finding a coach, using your network, attending local events to help you understand what questionnaire answer to respond to. And then being honest and transparent with your supervisor. I think those are phenomenal tips and resources, not only for the folks who are attending this as military spouses, but just as HHS colleagues, as we have these conversations even after this event. So our next question, starting with Precious and then Teresa and then Tracy, what would you say is the most rewarding part of being a military spouse and working as a civil servant?
Sure. Well, first of all, it is indeed an honor to work with HHS to serve the American public. And being a public servant, which is to me working in the highest form of public service by being a federal government employee, is really meaningful. And also I work in my field of e-learning, which is also so very rewarding. My branch is amazing that I work with. My supervisor is so supportive. I totally agree with you, Tracy. It's so important to have that strong support with your leadership. I consider myself to be a servant leader. I'm blessed and fortunate to have the chance to support HHS's mission to enhance the health and well-being of all Americans and to support laboratory professionals. Another very rewarding part of being a veteran spouse, working with HHS as a civil servant for me, is getting an LES statement like my husband. I mean, just let's be honest, well, for me, it's rewarding because I receive a leave and earnings statement like my husband always received when he was deployed. When he was deployed, I would get the statements. They would come to me. and they would have his name on it. And it's rewarding to have that status of being a federal government employee where I can contribute to my family and have a GS position that offers the work-life balance and have that statement that has my name on it. That's rewarding. And on to you, Tracy.
Yes. And Marilyn, I just answered your question that you had for me. I definitely think a recent graduates announcement would be a really great place to start. We do have a public health analyst position that is open right now in OASH. It is not a recent graduate. You're welcome to apply to that. I included the links to those announcements. And, you know, I always encourage people to always try to apply and just get your foot in the door, see if you can get on that cert, see if you can get an interview. But for what is the most rewarding part of being a military spouse working as a civil servant? That's a really good question. I would say I've just been extremely grateful and thankful that I've been able to retain employment for 13 years, that I have so many friends that live next door or within my community that I would say that is the biggest challenge, is finding employment during every PCS move. That is something I know we're the most underemployed demographic in the United States. I know we're like very well educated. I'm sure most of you on the call have a bachelor's or a master's or a PhD. And I just know we all military spouses work extremely hard and are usually overqualified and underpaid. So, but I find it very rewarding to be able to work in the federal government and to just be very appreciative of the job I have. I'm very, very proud of HHS and the work that we do, specifically OASH. You know, we're invested in the health and well-being of all Americans, and I think that's really special to be able to focus on indigenous groups or minority groups, to focus no matter who you are or where you come from. Health should be for all, and I really do believe in that mission. So yeah, that's what I would say about that question. And then Teresa, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. My answer actually kind of ties some of what Precious said and some of what you said, Tracy, together. And I think the most rewarding thing is the ability to dispel myths people have about military spouses. We have a reputation of being dependent, when in reality we face a huge unemployment rate of around 20% and even higher underemployment rates. And many of us want to contribute to our households and to our families. And we are very career oriented, but we face these obstacles that we're slowly chipping away at. But yeah, I think that's the most rewarding part, is even just in my branch or in my division, kind of showing people what military spouses are all about.
Hey, Matthew.
Yep, Adrian.
Oh, I was looking through some of the questions, and I'm going to try to answer a couple of the questions real quickly. One of the things that was asked about preference, and I need to understand, if you are a DOD, you're looking within DOD, looking for jobs within DOD. Military spouse preference can apply for DOD entities. If you're looking outside of DOD, you will be applying under the Military Spouse Non-Competitive Hiring Authority. And there are two different hiring flexibilities that are used. DOD can utilize military spouse preference if you are PCSing, and that is when military spouse preference can be utilized within and only within DOD. If you're PCSing and you're trying to find another position like at OPM or the Department of Transportation, you are applying under the Non-Competitive Hiring Authority, not military spouse preference. So you have to understand there are two different hiring flexibilities that have precedence here. Also, I think there was a question, is when you are applying for jobs on USA Jobs, agencies have at their discretion who they can post and what jobs that they can actually look at posting. One of the things, the Non-Competitive Hiring Authority, when you look at military spouse preference or persons with disabilities, or VOA, VRA, you're actually applying and you're not competing against veterans preference, which is a big, which is a law. Pretty much, veterans preference is a law that actually is out there that gives veterans preference when applying to jobs. I think one of the questions when you're open to all, open to the public, you can still apply as a military spouse, but it's up to the agencies when you're applying to open to all. They can pick and choose who and where they want to take applicants from. You still have to, let's be clear, you still have to qualify. And actually, you can actually qualify and apply to different flexibilities, not just one. And there's no advantage. The key thing here to remember, you have to qualify. And that is the key thing. When you are applying for any job, you have to make sure you are qualified for that opportunity. You're not getting any, you're not going to the head of the line because you're a military spouse, because you're still competing against military spouses. You have to be the best qualified military spouses. When they close that job, the agency is going to go through what they call CTAP and ICTAP, which they have to do. Then they can actually look at the list of military spouses and choose from that list of military spouses who they want to interview. But let's be clear, there's nothing out there that says, oh, you're going to have an unfair advantage, or you're going to have an advantage over this group of people compared to this group of people. You have to make sure, and I just finished a resume writing presentation, that your resume talks to the job and that you're qualifying yourself as the best candidate that meets the needs and recommendations and requirements for that job itself. So I'm hoping that can help clear up some of the answers right there. Oh, one more thing. Remote telework. That is an agency discretion tool that agencies have at their disposal to help military spouses. There is nothing that says they have to do that for military spouses. And you have to remember is that we're being called back to the office across the board, everybody. It doesn't matter if you are a veteran, a military spouse, a person with a disability, we are all being called back to the office. And it's at the discretion of the agency to grant telework or remote work based on the mission needs of that organization. So there's nothing that's going to say, okay, I'm a military spouse, you're the only group that I'm going to let telework, but exclude the other groups over here because who may have just as many issues and concerns as you. So it's about, when I briefed earlier, it's about advocating your ask within your organization. You have to advocate. It may, if you want to know where you need to start, if your division says no here, then I would always say you need to start at your Chico. Go to the Chico. They're the ones that are supposed to be implementing these policies, these guidance, and helping the military spouse along the way. But there are resources within that organization that you can go to. And it may be they can, and it may be they can't. I don't know. I work at OPM, and certain areas you may be able to telework, they may be able to grant remote work, and then there's other ones that may be public facing where they say, no, we're not going to do it. But again, it's based off the organizational needs and mission requirements on how they provide telework and remote work out within your agency.
Adrian, can I add to that real quick?
Yes, ma'am, please.
I'll just give everyone like a quick example. So within my staff division, within the Department of Health and Human Services, we do have a return to work initiative going on at the moment. And it has been deemed that if you are a supervisor, right? So it's basically called a code 2 within the government. If you are a supervisor, you are not allowed to be remote. So, our GS-14s and GS-15s, large majority of those are supervisory positions. So, for me, that promotion potential is not there, right? I am remote. There's no way I can come to DC. That is an internal policy. However, it might be different in another staff division or operating division, the way they divvy that out. I will say one thing, if you do apply to a remote position on USA Jobs and you are hired with the duty location as remote, that cannot be taken away from you. That is the authority that you were hired under. And so if you do get hired under a remote position. Just because you PCS doesn't mean that remoteness goes away. Now, OCONUS is a completely different story, but just keep that in mind. So like when you apply to a USA Jobs, if it says Rockville, Maryland, you must report physically to Rockville, Maryland for at least 90 days until maybe there's some kind of agreement that could be discussed at a later date possibly. So it's a lot harder to negotiate remote work if you were hired from like a specific duty location. And then I'll end with that.
All right. And definitely appreciate some of the questions that Adrian fielded from the audience. We have a portion after this to answer the rest of your questions. So continue. Continue submitting those questions, and we'll promptly answer them as we can. We won't be able to answer everyone, but definitely feel free to still submit your questions. So we already talked about a few of the obstacles. Adrian hinted at them, Tracy and Precious and Teresa. So our final question for panelists, and then we'll open it up to our audience, is what additional obstacles have you faced throughout your federal career as a military spouse? We talked about difficulties, constantly moving, flexibilities with, having supervisors understand how flexible your duty station needs to be. So what additional obstacles would you want to highlight? And then how have you overcome those obstacles in the process? And we'll start with Teresa, and then Tracy, and then Precious.
Yeah. I do want to reiterate that although we're not entitled to remote work or anything like that, it is still a huge barrier when hiring managers are not flexible to have positions located for the CDC outside of the Atlanta area. And then it also seems like remote-only positions are becoming more rare. And I also want to emphasize that oftentimes the limitations we face as military spouses, it's in access and not necessarily in aptitude. So there's nothing we can do better with our resumes. We have to have access to positions in order to fill them, and having more access to remote work would be very helpful for our community.
There are lots of obstacles that we face. I think they're different obstacles compared to maybe a veteran or a person with disability or Schedule A. We all have these obstacles, and I think the biggest obstacle is understanding the policy, understanding the regulation, understanding what information has to be shared to communicate your qualifications or communicate your desire to keep a job. I would say having the HR experience has helped me understand a little bit of it. But I would say just there's so much information out there. Knowing what information is accurate or what information pertains to you, I think that's a huge obstacle, because if you don't understand your eligibility, or you don't understand your qualification or what hiring mechanism you can use, that's really where it all starts. So for me, it was just lots and lots of reading, and asking lots and lots of questions in the beginning. And then Precious, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. So I would say that the major obstacle that I experienced was just in figuring out how to work full time with a husband who was 100% disabled. I'm going to say that the way that I overcame that is by coming to an agency like HHS that offers the work schedules that are unique. Workplace flexibilities have been huge for me, and because of them, I am able to overcome that obstacle. For example, the flexible tour, MaxiFlex schedule. Actually, I would give that as an example. It's a workplace flexibility that HHS offers all employees, so that while maintaining the requirement of the 40-hour work week, one can actually vary the number of hours worked in a day or vary the number of hours worked in the week within limits established by the organization, and of course, in adherence with core hours set by the agency as well. And then there is the 410, or the different ways like, working 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, off 1 day a week, things like that, which for me, then I can schedule my husband's appointments on that, the day that I'm off. Things like that, those workplace flexibilities help me to overcome that obstacle of being able to work.
All right. Well, thank you all for being honest and transparent and vulnerable and sharing your obstacles that I'm sure a lot of the attendees can relate to and empathize with, and for giving a few tips and resources for how you've overcome those obstacles. So now we're going to open up to the rest of the questions that we've been slowly but surely answering in the Q&A feature. So I'll start with this one. And Tracy, you might be able to answer this with your HR background. So for those who aren't necessarily familiar with the process of transferring within, the government and PSC orders, can you explain the process, and then what tips and advice would you be able to share?
Yeah, say that one more time, Matt. I just want to make sure I get that question right.
So just explaining the process for transferring within government agencies and following PSC orders.
PCS.
PCS,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. Okay, this is kind of a heavy question, and Adrian, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if you are a remote employee and your husband PCSs from one state to another, that should not impact you. So for example, I was remote from North Carolina for the National Institutes of Health, and we physically moved to Washington, D.C. That did not impact my job except for my salary table because of the location. I got paid a different salary rate, but my job stayed the same. My grade, my title, my series, it all stayed the same. And it actually wasn't a transfer. It was just like a home address change of record for me. There was nothing there. Now, if you're trying to, like, let's say you're working in Georgia and you physically report to an office in Georgia, but let's say your husband gets stationed in Washington State and you applied to a job with another federal agency in Washington State and you got that position without a break in service, that would be that could be what we would call a transfer, but your title, series, and grade would all have to be the same for it to be like a non-competitive. If you applied to an announcement, it would just be another competitive hire, and you would just transition without a break in service to that new location. There's a lot of different nuances to that. So if there was more specifics to that question, I might be able to help a little bit more. I hope I'm answering that question, whoever posed that question.
I believe you did, and
Okay.
we're going to try to answer these questions, but of course they're very nuanced and handled on a case-by-case basis. But I believe Adrian can hop in and provide his expertise.
No, I think, Tracy, you did a great job of explaining that. Because there, like you say, it's a lot of nuances, and I think to understand, you have to have the whole picture, and sometimes we're not able to get the whole picture of what they may be explaining. But I think you did a great job, because there is different nuances in one agency to the next agency. It's going to do it differently, and that's the one thing that you do have to remember out here. But one thing that will happen is the locality pays will change. Sometimes they will go up, sometimes they'll go down. If you're coming out here toward the East Coast, they're probably going to go up if you're somewhere on the West. But if you go out West, and sometimes pretty much if you go anywhere outside of DC, California, or Hawaii, you can almost look at your locality pay going down if you were in a high locality pay area. So it is one of those things that, yes, you are remote working, but it is, when you transfer and you move, there is going to be some changes in your pay. Now, and I think Tracy, you hit on this. One of the things, if you're hired at it, because of COVID-19, a lot of people were moved to remote work. And I think a lot of people say, well, when I was hired as a remote worker. Well, I think many agencies were hiring you into positions, but they let you work remotely. There's a big difference than being hired as a remote worker. So that's been one of the big issues that I've had to deal with when I have spouses calling and asking what can they do, how can they do it. These new executive orders, they're guidelines for agencies to help them implement new policy. Unfortunately, there's still a lot to, there's a long way to go. There's still a long way to go, and we're going through the growing pains. There are going to be growing pains before all these policies and guidance are implemented and actually full-time implemented within the agencies that are going to be concrete. And I know it can be frustrating. I know it can be like, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do? I'm going to lose my job. But what we're trying to do is, like I said, I want to try to continue to advocate for you as you go forward. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be an overnight success, but I'm willing to work with you and try to get you in touch with the right people. Sometimes I can, sometimes they may say yay, sometimes they may say no. But it's one of these things that's just going to take time to implement a lot of the policies and guidance that was given under Executive Order 14100.
And Adrian, can I say something? Because I thought of something when you
Yes,
were just talking. Let's say you're a current federal employee and let's use the Georgia example again. You live in Atlanta, Georgia, but your current office isn't allowing you to go remote and you're PCSing somewhere. And so the time is ticking until you have to be, separated from the position. I would highly encourage you to research leave without pay and see if there is a time or an agreement you can go into with your current agency to basically exhaust your leave, like your annual and your sick leave, and then go on leave without pay until you can find a position at wherever you're going next. Because what you're trying to avoid here is a break-in service if you can. Me personally, if I were in this situation, I would do everything I can to avoid a break-in service. So all of my bucket of information from one agency seamlessly gets transferred to the new agency that I'm hired at without a break-in service. I think it's easier long-term. I think there's more benefits in doing that. There's a lot of things that go into being a career or career conditional employee. So if you are in that boat, try to buy yourself some time and advocate for yourself and try to stay on an agency's role without being separated and then having to be re-onboarded with another agency. That would be my advice.
And one little last caveat. Here's one thing that is you can do if you can't find. You can actually look for a lower position to actually get transferred to. If you do that and you get that lower position, like let's say you're 11, you go and you find you're a 9, you can actually go into that position, maintain your GS11 salary, but now it's up to you to find a permanent position within the next 2 years, or you will be automatically placed in that GS9 position. So again, here's another tool that you can actually utilize if they don't have a GS11 position. You can look at a lower position to see, okay, do they have one that's a GS9 that I could go into? Or have you, I think, Tracy, you hit it. It's about, if you know ahead of time, it's time to start working your HR departments. Your HR department is your greatest asset. Go to them, ask them, what do you have on this coast? Where do you have out here? Again, you have to articulate your ask and know how you need to ask it in a way that's going to get you the result you want. And again, that one thing of taking a lower position for a couple of years while still maintaining your GS11 grade is a big win for you. You have 2 years to find a position. Instead of you stressing about, oh my gosh, I can't find it. If I take a lower, I have at least some time to get to where I'm going. Now I can look a lot more comfortably and without the stress and still maintain your your career within that agency.
These are all wonderful points. And so when in doubt, read the fine print. Make sure that you are applying for a remote position, not a telework
Or
eligible position. Make
position.
sure you're printing out the job vacancy. You are highlighting it. You are going through it. It is so easy to miss a specific text, especially when certain vacancies are duplicates, but one is for remote and one is for a duty station. The remote positions are remote. It's fixed to a locality, and depending on what you assign your duty station, that is what your locality will be. And then at any point in time you have to move, and it's remote and it's in the States, you can keep that position. For telework eligible positions, it's a little more restrictive. So because each office and agency and department has their own nuanced policies, just make sure you're reading the fine print for the vacancy announcement. And while we are talking about the direct hiring authorities for military spouses, you don't have to use them. You can apply to positions for Schedule A if you have a documented disability. You can apply to positions for recent grads if you're graduated in the past 2 years. You can apply to jobs that are just generally open to the public. Just make sure that you are using and exhausting all of the resources that are available to you, making sure that you're tailoring your resume to the specific job vacancy that you are applying for, making sure that you're including additional required documents for every vacancy that requires that document, making sure you're going through and looking at the assessment questionnaire in advance. These are all very important tips to be reminded of, just because the federal government application process is so competitive. And like Traci mentioned, if you incorrectly answer a question based on your qualification assessment, that might knock you out. So just be very flexible and patient when understanding all the nuances, and apply to as many vacancies as you're eligible and qualified for. So we're coming up towards the end of our time together. Just have a few more questions that we can get to. For each of y'all, how has HHS supported your transition and integration to the workforce as a military spouse? And if there are any programs, initiatives, upcoming employee resource groups that are in place that have been particularly helpful for you. And then how can military spouses best position themselves for success in their offices? So I'll start with Traci, and then Teresa, and then Precious.
Sure. So the office I work in now, OASH, is significantly smaller than the one I came from at NIH. When I was at NIH, there was a military spouses network group. It was an informal group of about 20 military spouses, and we got together once a month just to pose questions, educate each other on maybe new information we were not aware of, and also just be a support system to each other for questions or PCS moves, those types of things. It was a great group. Now that I work in OASH, I only work with a little under 500 people, so it's a much smaller organization. I honestly don't think there's very many military spouses within my new community. Lots of veterans, lots of retired military, but not a lot of spouses. So I don't have a lot to contribute right now, but I would say if you can find a military spouse that works within the office or the agency that you are interested in working for, would definitely connect with them, and they can give you some scoops or insights into maybe jobs that are being advertised or different leadership that are advocates for remote work, that type of thing. And then I will pass it back over to another panelist.
Yeah, I agree with that. Having networking, making maybe an informal network across different centers for people you would want to talk to about different jobs that are coming up. Yeah, that's all really I have to add. If CDC does have a employee resource group, I'd love to join, and if not, I'd love to try to get it started for military spouses.
Sure. And I was just going to say that as like Teresa also mentioned, I haven't found I have not found a networking group that's specific to or for military spouses. But there are networking groups that are helpful and that provide those resume building courses and workshops that Adrian alluded to earlier at the top of the call. The Blacks in Government, the Young Professionals Network, just a couple of the networking groups that I'm a part of that, I found invaluable information about, including the federal hiring process, and just getting enough information to go out and research more about the things that are available to military spouses. So I would encourage to just, join networking groups because I think that I found them all to be enriching, even though they're not all particularly for the population of veteran spouses, they still are very enriching. So.
All right. Yeah, that's a great point, Precious. So everyone has opportunities to highlight their own intersectionality within their identities, not just as a military spouse, but for a number of professional networks across the federal government, specific to agencies. So if you are a current federal employee, look into what groups that you can be a part of. And then through those larger groups, you might be able to find a few other military spouses that you weren't connected with before. And then, just like Teresa, you might be able to find, the pioneer to start a new resource group based on those conversations. So it's all about, your network and who you know and the relationships that you make throughout your career, not just as a military spouse, but as a federal employee. So
I'd
thank
like
you.
to add to that just really quick.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
there is a lot of employee resource groups at HHS. We do have several military spouse resource groups, but at CDC, there is one for veterans. If you're interested in starting one for military spouses, get in touch with me and I can connect you to the right people. Thank you for that too, for volunteering for that.
Absolutely. All right, so with our remaining time that we have today, we just want to wrap up today's session and leave you with a few more resources. So the links shown in this presentation will be hyperlinked and they'll be made available in the PDF copy. So don't feel like you have to, take screenshots or pictures. And so these are just a number of resources that Paris and her team have found helpful that we want to leave you with, including resources from OPM, in addition to how to format your resume. We've talked about your resume being your bread and butter for being competitive, for being qualified, and to making yourself stand out, to not only using the hiring authorities that are available for you, but also making sure that you're competitive amongst military spouses that you're applying with. So just make sure that you are creating an account on USA Jobs and applying to those positions as they are posted. Here are additional resources from the Department of Defense, Department of Labor, OPM, Department of Veteran Affairs, and Chamber of Commerce. And then be sure to attend additional events from the HHS career team, happening both virtually and across the country. Our next in-person event is going to be in San Diego in July. And then you'll see a few additional webinars and career fairs specifically for veterans, for military spouses, how to navigate the federal application process. We're going to be going over navigating USA Jobs and how to tailor a federal resume, in addition to supporting veterans and military spouses, and also celebrating Veterans Day this upcoming November. So be sure to find out all of these events and register not only on our HHS.gov/careers page, where you'll find our events calendar, but also on our LinkedIn. If you're on social media at HHS Careers, is where you'll find events, resources, informative posts, as well as job vacancies that are posted across the HHS enterprise. And if you're a current student who happens to be a military spouse, then and your school has Handshake, be on the lookout for positions that are posted on Handshake as well. Lastly, we want to provide our Veterans Employment Program officers contact information to help assist you with any additional questions that we didn't get to answer today. We request that you please don't submit your resumes or any information that contains sensitive HR-related inquiries. And if you had specific questions we unfortunately weren't able to answer due to time, you can submit those directly to vets at HHS.gov, and Paris and Kala will be able to promptly answer those on a case-by-case basis. And we appreciate your patience as we work to promptly respond to those. Lastly, I want to give one more shout out and a word of praise to my esteemed HHS colleagues, our keynote speaker, Adrian Williams from OPM, and our terrific panelists. So as a final reminder, there'll be a survey at the conclusion of the presentation, and we do greatly appreciate your feedback as we create additional programming to help support veterans and military spouse applicants and current HHS employees across the HHS enterprise. And we hope everyone had a wonderful weekend celebrating Military Spouse Appreciation Day, and we look forward to seeing you at future events by HHS Careers. Thank you for your service to HHS, for your federal careers, for your support for your spouses, and for your inspiring stories today. We could not have done this event without you, and thank you for all the attendees who joined today. We look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a great day. Take care.
Produced by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.